Val Kilmer was, for a time, one of the most sought-after and promising actors in Hollywood. In the 1990s, he starred in iconic films and demonstrated an admirable versatility, going from a daring pilot in Top Gun to a visceral actor in The Doors, and to one of the most coveted roles in cinema, Batman in Batman Forever. His presence was striking, his talent undeniable, and his career seemed destined for lasting success. However, suddenly and without fanfare, Kilmer simply disappeared from the spotlight. For almost 15 years, he barely appeared in any relevant projects, becoming practically invisible to the major studios. He himself even said that he seemed to be on a kind of blacklist. The most intriguing thing is that there was no public scandal, no formal dismissal, and no clear reason to explain his exclusion. He was silenced, as if he had been erased from the Hollywood landscape. This omission is all the more surprising considering the strength of his previous career. Kilmer was seen as a natural-born star. His performance as Jim Morrison was critically acclaimed, and his take on The Dark Knight sparked intense debate among fans. But everything changed suddenly when, without justification, he was replaced by George Clooney in Batman and Robin. The change was not accompanied by official statements or public statements. It was simply made. For someone at the height of his powers, this kind of abrupt axing was unusual, and the industry's silence surrounding it made it all the more strange. As time went on, fragmented explanations emerged. Joel Schumacher, the director of Batman Forever, broke his silence years later and described his experience with Kilmer as hellish. He even called him psychotic and said he prayed he would never have to work with him again. According to Schumacher, Kilmer was difficult behind the scenes, creating a tense and complicated environment during filming. But this allegation, while serious, raises other questions. After all, Hollywood is full of stories about temperamentally challenging actors who continue to be hired and even revered. So, why was Kilmer so drastically dismissed? The answer may lie in another theory, advanced by none other than Mel Gibson, who worked with Kilmer and maintained a respectful relationship with him. For Gibson, the problem was not Kilmer's temperament, but his reluctance to play the Hollywood power game. Kilmer was known for questioning orders, challenging producers and directors, and speaking his mind without filter. In an industry driven by unofficial hierarchies, where staying in line can be more important than talent, such attitudes are seen as a threat. Kilmer did not take orders blindly, did not smile at executives just to secure a role, and did not make alliances for the sake of convenience. This put him on a collision course with an establishment that prefers quiet obedience to loud authenticity. Kilmer's demise, then, doesn't seem to have been just a consequence of backstage infighting or poor career choices. It seems to be a reflection of how the industry treats those who refuse to bend. Hollywood is an industry that tends to cultivate myths and carefully constructed narratives, but it is also known for silencing those who challenge its control. The entertainment machine does not take kindly to those who go off script, who question, who demand more than the role of a puppet. Val Kilmer is a clear example of this. Instead of just acting, he dared to confront, improvise, challenge creative directions and defy hierarchies. He not only rewrote scripts, but rejected them outright when he felt they did not match his artistic truth. That was when the subtle ostracism began. The doors that closed without fanfare, the invitations that simply stopped coming. No headlines said he was being punished, but one only had to observe his progressive disappearance to realize that something was off. Years later, Kilmer spoke openly about his behavior at the height of his career. He admitted his mistakes with disarming honesty. He said he was arrogant, talked too much, and didn't know how to play the Hollywood game. He naively believed that talent and passion were enough to succeed. He didn't blame producers or directors. He took responsibility. He recognized that in that system, more than emotional surrender was required. It required diplomacy, politics, and silent obedience. By rebelling, he became a nuisance. And in Hollywood, nuisances are dismissed with silence. The most disturbing thing is to realize that Kilmer was not an isolated case. In the late 1990s, other big names also began to disappear from the screens. Mel Gibson, then one of the most influential stars in cinema, began to be left aside. Wesley Snipes, a leading man in several successful films and a pioneer as a black action hero, was marginalized. Brendan Fraser, a man with rare charisma and genuine talent, also disappeared mysteriously. The reasons were never clear. Sometimes they spoke of personal problems. Other times, difficulties on the set, but the rumors, never confirmed but persistent, pointed to a machine that silences without leaving a trace. Gibson even said that he felt watched, like in an old Western film where a stranger enters a saloon and everyone stares at him in silence, suspicious, waiting for him to make the first mistake so they can act. And then, 1999 arrives. A year that, looking back, seems shrouded in a thick shadow. Stanley Kubrick, one of the most visionary filmmakers in history, releases Eyes Wide Shut. His most mysterious and provocative film dies suddenly before the final cut, or so they say. 25 minutes of the film are cut without a convincing explanation. The content of these scenes has never been made public. Theories arise, but none are confirmed. Coincidentally, or not, it is in that same year that Val Kilmer disappears from major projects. The timing is too strange to be ignored. There seems to be a silent cleaning going on behind the scenes, an invisible reorganization of the board. Everything that challenges control, that puts the structure at risk, begins to be carefully removed, without scandal, without headlines, but with surgical precision. The truth is that Hollywood doesn't correct, it just protects itself. It doesn't debate its flaws. It silences those who expose them. The system is built to maintain narrative control. When someone threatens the order, the system doesn't need to justify itself. It just erases it. Val Kilmer, behind the iconic figure of Batman in Batman Forever, reveals himself to be a much more complex character than audiences may have realized at the time. His performance as Bruce Wayne was not exactly charismatic or heroic in the classic sense. There was something dark, restrained, almost suffocated. It was as if Kilmer was playing a man in constant conflict, not only with Gotham's villains, but with even more intense inner demons. His version of the masked hero seemed to use the costume not as a symbol of power, but as emotional armor, a shield against something that was eating away at him from within. When revisiting his career and personal life, especially through the documentary Val-E, released in 2021, it is impossible not to notice this subtext. The film, composed largely of home videos and personal archives that he recorded himself over the decades, shows a man who always knew he needed to document everything, as if he foresaw that one day he would need to prove something, or simply leave an honest trail of who he really was. At the same time that Val Kilmer is starting to distance himself from Hollywood, other shadows are growing behind the scenes of the industry, and one of them has a name: Jeffrey Epstein. The case of the financier involved in an international network of sex trafficking and abuse, with connections that extended to the highest circles of power, began to attract attention precisely when figures like Kilmer disappeared from the radar. Passenger lists, flight records, guests to exclusive islands, everything began to emerge in fragments, leaving more questions than answers. Some rumors suggest that Kilmer had refused some type of invitation, asked uncomfortable questions, or shown restlessness at inappropriate times. No one has any proof, but there is a silent pattern. Figures who disappear, projects cancelled, careers abruptly interrupted. It is in this environment of veiled tension that Val's name is once again circulating, not with fanfare, but with a certain mystery in the air. Meanwhile, another project with deep and thorny roots is starting to gain attention: Sound of Freedom. The film is about the rescue of child victims of sex trafficking based on real events and faced extreme obstacles before its release. Despite the support of big names like Mel Gibson, the film was ignored by the major studios and spent years shelved. When it finally came out, independently, it became a box office phenomenon. Millions of people went to see it, motivated both by curiosity and a sense of urgency regarding the subject. And yet, the mainstream media preferred to disdain or attack the film, accusing it of sensationalism or promoting conspiracy theories. The institutional silence was as deafening as any controversy, a silence that, for many, confirmed that there are topics that simply cannot be spoken about freely. Mel Gibson, for his part, had been seen as a controversial name in Hollywood for years. Known for not mincing words, he was one of the few who publicly took a stand against the industry's systematic abuses. He spoke out about sexual exploitation, about networks of power that protect predators, about the hypocrisy behind the glamour. When he got involved in defending Sound of Freedom, seemed not just an artistic gesture, but something more visceral, more personal. This attitude reinforced his image as an unwanted figure at major events, of someone who was sidelined not because of talent, which he never lacked, but because he was too uncomfortable in a structure that preferred to keep certain curtains closed. Gibson, like Kilmer, became a symbol, not of failure, but of resistance, of voices that, even with everything against them, continue to try to say what many do not want to hear. Silence as protection was not, for Val Kilmer, a gesture of surrender. It was a conscious choice, a shield erected against the overwhelming noises of an industry that devours its idols. While others sought answers in screams, public exposures, and direct confrontations, Kilmer chose to retreat. Unlike Mel Gibson, who faced his own demons in public and continued to scream and scandal, Val retreated slowly, word by word, presence by presence. His silence was resistance, a barrier between his essence and the brutality of the spectacle. His appearance in Top Gun Maverick was received by the public as an emotional, almost heroic return. But there was something deeper, more dense in that short and moving participation. For those who followed his trajectory, what they saw there was a carefully staged last act. Val no longer had a voice. Literally, what we heard on the screen was a digital reconstruction, an echo of who he once was, a simulation created by artificial intelligence. It was as if the cinema itself, which had fed so much on him, was now offering a posthumous tribute while he was alive, a device to give us the illusion that he was still there, when in fact he had already begun to disappear, and disappearing in fact was what he did. After the film, Val fell into an even deeper silence. He cancelled interviews, stopped appearing at events, and responded less and less to his friends. Even his closest family members began to be distanced. Isolation was no longer just an emotional choice. It became a physical one, almost ritualistic. It was as if he were preparing his exit, step by step, like an actor rehearsing the last scene of a play that he knows will never be repeated. When the news of his death came in April, many felt that it had happened before. Officially, the cause was pneumonia, but the truth revealed by the autopsy was more cruel. Poorly treated infections, clear signs of malnutrition, evidence of accumulated suffering, physical, psychological, spiritual. The goodbye was subtle, almost symbolic. Days before he died, Kilmer posted a brief video in which he appeared dressed as Batman, a role he played in the 1990s. He looked at the camera with a soft smile, but there was something broken in his eyes. He said, "I have an animal for us, for a long time." At the time, No one quite understood it. Now, the video has crystallized as a cryptic, intimate, strangely poetic farewell, as if he were telling us, with the little voice he had left, that it was time to go, but in his own way, on his own terms. Val Kilmer was much more than a box office star. He was a complex, sometimes misunderstood figure who faced fame not as a trophy, but as a silent battle. His trajectory raises uncomfortable questions. How many artists choose silence to survive? How many prefer emotional exile to submitting to the cruel rules of a system that only values those who can still give something in return? Perhaps Kilmer. Silence was, in the end, his most daring act, a final denial of the logic of spectacle, a reminder that resistance sometimes is simply to shut up and retreat, and that, in that gesture, there can be a force more powerful than any scream.